Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Just wanted to let everyone know I appreciate you guys so much watching my videos and checking me out. Um, Today I have a crazy deck list, and don't knock it before you try it. And we're gonna go right into it because it is pretty insane. All right, let's do it. All right, guys. So this is my Rainbow Palpatine deck list. It is kind of crazy. We are playing every single aspect in it. The idea is that we can always beat a control deck because of some looping value I will talk about as the video goes. And that if we put in every single piece of removal, maybe we can survive against aggro decks too. And in my sideboard, I have just a bunch of healing and some more tools versus aggro, and then like 2 more copies of cards that might help versus the control deck. But let's talk about my initial, why I wanted to make this deck. So let's say we have Palpatine. So in the late game, it's really hard for our opponents to play big guys because we can just steal them. So that's why we're playing Palpatine. We've turned off the first big guy my opponent plays, which is really powerful. Sometimes they can't even afford to play their big guy just because we get to steal it. So that's why we're playing Palpatine. The reason we're playing a red base is because all of the good removal spells are in red, like the 3 copies of Force Choke, the 3 copies of Open Fire, and then all the cool cards that we're playing that you never see. So, the MVP of this deck is Ruthless Raider. On play, Ruthless Raider does 2 damage to any unit and to the enemy base, which is super crucial because that activates Force Surrender. Force Surrender says draw 2 cards, but your opponent discards 2 cards if you've damaged their base. So I know this is a lot of resources, but at 12 resources, you could play a Ruthless Raider and then Force Surrender them, which is crazy value. Also, Ruthless Raider has the effect on death, so if it stays alive for 1 turn, you can always use Palpatine ability to kill it off yourself or swing at the base, or if they remove it, right, a bunch of different ways, it's going to be dealing 2 damage to the base, activating your Force Surrender. Now, you might say, hey, against a control deck, they have infinite cards in their hand. Well, we're playing 2 copies of Smoke and Cinders. So that way, if we still have a Ruthless Raider from the turn before, and we're at 11 resources, which, guys, does happen versus control. During my control matchups, I was getting anywhere from 18 to 20. I actually got 25 resources one game, which is crazy. So you have a lot of resources in this deck. Obviously, there's 9 ways to get it, but yeah, you Smoke and Cinders them. They only have 2 cards left in hand. You've already done damage that turn, and then you Force Surrender. And then they're just drawing off the top of their deck for the rest of the game, which makes it very easy, right? You also have a bunch of other discard effects. Well, one other, you have Spark of Rebellion that can come in later in the game to get that last piece. I actually was playing Force Throw for a little bit, but I decided I wanted Reinforcement Walkers instead for some more healing against these aggro decks. All right, so let's talk about the general gameplay versus control, because that's actually why I built this deck, to just always be control and make them have a miserable time. And I also wanted to test out the idea, can I put in every aspect in a deck, and will I get punished, or will it just feel insane? And against control, this does just feel insane. So against control, they're not really playing many units. Maybe they play like a Child Sin. But we play Power of the Dark Side, which counters that pretty well. Paying 5 for this card is not a problem versus control. Actually, paying 5 for this card against most decks is not really that bad. It's like an on-rate Vanquish, right? So, obviously bad if the deck goes super wide, but if they're just playing 1 or 2 guys, Power of the Dark Side isn't too bad. So we're just trying to mulligan for our resupplies, our super laser techs. We just want to ramp faster. All these control decks right now aren't playing green, so we just want to get resources, have more resources in them throughout the entire game. Also, command. What we're usually doing with command is we're turning it into a resource instead of using its other effects, and bringing a unit from our grave to our hand. Now, if you guys haven't already seen, I'm playing 1 Bounty Hunter Crew, and Bounty Hunter Crew returns an event from your discard pile to your hand. So you can kind of actually go infinite with the commands and Bounty Hunter Crews. Command returns Bounty Hunter Crew, and then you play the Bounty Hunter Crew, right? It can be pretty good, but the real better part about that is it's very, 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 very hard to lose against a deck that's trying to mill you when you have so many ways to find the restock and also mill them back. So we're playing Restock Vigilance just like they're doing, but but I have 3 copies of Command that can return the Bounty Hunter crew to my hand, which can then also get back the Restocker Vigilance, right? So I'm playing essentially 4 more copies than they are, and we're maining Spark of Rebellion. So that's really hard for the control. Not only that, but we're playing Mission Briefing. So in the early game, we get to see more cards than them, and we can actually choose them at the end of the game to make them draw 2 cards. Some cool combos you could do against control once you get into the late game is when you have like 18 resources in your disposal, you can have a restock and a mission briefing in your hand. You play the restock targeting itself, which if you guys didn't know, you can target itself with restock. You put 2 other mission briefings back into your deck and a force surrender. And then you play the 1 mission briefing from your hand, and you're always going to get a draw 2 spell. So then you play the other draw 2 spell, and then you'll have everything you just played with restock back in your hand. And if you got unlucky and drew the force surrender first, that means you've played 1, 3, 6 of your resources, so that's 10, and you still have 8 left. So you could cast, the vigilance if it's still in your hand, or you could just play restock again, returning the mission briefing, restock, and 2 vigilance to your deck. And you guys can kind of see what's happening right now. And I'm just going to draw my vigilances out every single turn. And it's going to be really, really tough for my opponent to do anything. You can also just get whatever tool you want with mission briefing and restock in that same scenario, right? I can like add sparks back to my hand if I want to make my opponent discard. I can get the power of the dark set if I need it, right? We can just add the bounty hunter crew just to return it from our grave back to our hand. So we have like all of these really, really annoying plays because we're playing mission briefing, and the fact that we can target our opponent and say, hey, draw 2 cards. Oh, you take 6. Hey, draw 2 cards. Oh, you take 6. Like I could just play 3 of these on my opponent when they have no deck and they're taking 18 damage. So our opponent is not ever beating us if they're a control deck. And we have Smoke and Cinders. Like I'm saying, if they have 10 cards in hand, now they're down to 2 cards and they're cooked. Change of Heart answers every single late game card they could possibly play, because you could just use Palpatine effect to tribute the guy that you took. Against control, most of the time, I don't even really need to summon Palpatine. My leader is just there for show to scare them, but I have summoned him before against control with this deck. So that is the basic idea versus control, is that I'm kind of comboing them at the end of the game. I have way more tools to mill them and play into the long game because of playing these 3 commands, the bounty hunter crew, and force surrenders. Force surrender, I actually really like this card. If you guys are still watching at this point, I recommend you guys trying force surrender in a Darth Vader deck, one that's trying to get a little bit of edge in the control mirror. And I think you guys can actually this card can be pushed. I actually thought this card was absolute trash, but when you start playing these control mirrors, or even against mid-range, and if you make your opponent discard the last 2 cards in their hand, that could be pretty brutal, especially like, if you swing first and they swing back and then they only have 2 cards in hand that turn and you're like, force surrender, okay, your turn's over. Ha. So pretty cool. And now we just have a bunch of cards that deal with aggression, right? We're playing copies of Bombing Run, Traitorous, Open Fire, Force Choke, Entrench, Power of the Dark Side, Vanquish. Like, yeah, these cards are out of aspect, a lot of them, and they might cost a little bit more. But most of the removal tools are in color, but, Vanquish and Power are outside. But they still get the job done, I think. I want you guys, if you guys have these cards, to try out the deck and, do your best to see how it fares against other decks and make some changes, because I've been, playing around with cards in this deck a lot. Like my recent ad was Reinforcement Walker, because I actually found I always made it to 8 resources against these aggro decks, but I just needed a little bit more healing. If I could just stabilize, if I drew a Vigilance on 8 resources, I almost always won. Like summoning Palpatine, maybe taking a unit, healing 5, killing another unit is actually pretty devastating for a Sabine deck if you make it to 8 resources. Which again, I think actually happens a lot because you have all these ramp tools and you have all these destruction tools. It's just the fact that even though you make it to 8 resources, a lot of times you can just still die to the Sabine. But that's why we want more healing, and resolving a Reinforcement Walker is just healing 3 every single turn that you can afford to swing with him, which is really good. But yes, try out this deck, guys. There are a lot of flex spots. I think Traitorous and Vanquish are flex spots. I think the Reinforcement Walker is a flex spot. I think a lot of these cards you can count down to 2. I'm not sure I'm in love with Entrenched, so you could try cutting a card for Entrenched out. I also don't know if we need to even main Spark of Rebellions. This deck is so good against control that I actually don't know if we even need to play this card. Yes, it does cost 6, but yeah, you know, whatever, it doesn't matter. We have infinite resources in this deck, which you'll see if you can put it together. It's super fun. So yeah, so I would mess around with some of the slots and see how you can beat aggro. Because if this deck can be made to consistently have a 51% win rate against Sabine, man, this is going to be just the craziest deck. Because it always beats control and surprisingly does very good into mid-range because you have a lot of value tools. And once you're getting to, you know, 8 resources, almost everything you do is just like so good against them. Also, like playing Palpatine against any mid-range deck is really annoying for them because like you pretty much eliminated their top end. And going on to 8 and playing a Palpatine, taking their best unit, playing Change of Heart, swinging with their best unit if you can, or just tributing it with Palpatine swing, like that's a huge swing turn. How many times can I say swing, right? And that becomes pretty crazy. We can talk about the sideboard real fast. I've been playing around with these slots. I have the 3rd copies of Restock and Spark, which I think can change. I actually don't know if this deck even needs 3 Restock because we're playing Commands and Bounty Hunter Crew. But I definitely like Imperial Interceptor. This card seems sometimes necessary versus decks that play space units with only 3 health, like Sabine. It just comes in and kills it, and then also like controls the space in the future. Like anytime they play a space unit and you now have like a removal tool that's just chilling there, it's not like you're attacking with this thing to their face. But you could with Force Surrender, right? So that option's there. But it's mostly just deal 3 damage to a unit. And it's just like another copy of Open Fire. If you notice, this deck doesn't really play anything that costs 4 anyways. So if you miss your ramp tool, like that's just what you're going to be doing on 4 resources. You know, on 7 resources, you can combine this with something else. If you're alive enough, another reason is this is good against Fet's Fire Spray. If you can like resupply at 7 resources and go to 8, and then play an Imperial Interceptor, hit the Fire Spray, flip Palpatine, take it. They might not actually see that coming. Yes, you're still taking 5 to a Fire Spray, but now it's yours, and they're sad. So that's a cool play to consider. What else? Yeah, and I've been trying out Repair. Just to heal. Like I said, you make it to 8 resources against Sabine, and if you can go Repair and then play like a Bombing Run or something, like you can try to stabilize with this card. So Repair is my new addition that I'm trying out, and I'm also trying out 2 copies of Make an Opening. My original sideboard was like a lot of dudes. I was playing the 3/4 Sentinel when you have 6 resources. I was playing the 2/3 that heals 1 every time you play a green unit. I was trying those cards out. But now I realized that actually I didn't like playing units in the early game, so I'm just going back to playing more spells, more events, and seeing how that works. Again, this deck is like the craziest thing I ever made, and I honestly expected it to do terrible in testing, and it did a lot better than I thought. I will say it makes your control opponents very sad because they just sit there and they're like, man, I just can never beat this deck. So, but if you want to make your opponents feel that way, this is the deck for you. If you guys have any questions about this deck, you know, let me know in the comments below. And I appreciate you guys again so much for watching. And yeah, please make changes, adjust it, make this deck awesome. That's what I want to see. All right, I want to see a rainbow deck succeed. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and peace.